My hope is that this week's video will really shine a light on this topic of death and grieving, because we have so much here to see with our spiritual eyes. Remain open and curious as we explore this week's profound wisdom quotes together. Any kind of loss or death leaves an emptiness behind when the form is no longer there. Don't run away from that empty space. It's an opening into the formless. One could say every form obscures God, and the death of the form enables God, which is the formless one, life, to shine through. Therefore, death has long been recognized as sacred in ancient cultures that had not denied it, whereas modern Western civilization denies death. They don't know it's sacred. They don't even want to talk about it. Death is hidden because the Western culture is totally identified with form, with the mind, so the worst possible thing for it is death. Every old people's home, if they accepted it, would be a spiritual center. The greatest ashrams would be old people's homes, because that is the potential of old age, but it's not recognized yet. They would be the most sacred places. These ancient cultures had recognized the sacredness of death, not knowing perhaps why. Intuitively, they knew it to be sacred. But now we can see why it is sacred, because the formless shines through where there was the form. So Eckhart says that in our Western culture, all we tend to talk about and all we really know is the body and the mind. It's the physical and the psychological aspects of ourselves. And if that's all we know, death is actually going to appear as something really scary. So it's no wonder that we want to run away from it, avoid it, and ignore it. This view that we have is a very unbalanced and unhealthy view of death. And of course, however we view death very much affects how we view grieving. Isn't it true that death is something we don't want to talk about? The trouble with that is then that when you lose a loved one or someone you know is grieving, we don't know how to deal with that. What do we do with those emotions? How can we understand what death actually is? A wave is ocean, and when it rises up, it's given the name wave. When it's given this name, it's like it has an independent existence. It seems to roll along the surface, which is all water, water flowing in water, and this we call life. Then it subsides, and this is called death. Actually, nothing happened to the water. It's just a natural movement. But because name and form are attributed to it, it appears as a separate existence or entity. All the while, it is only the play of water rising, flowing, subsiding. No story. Mind makes the story by creating an illusory identity. In true understanding, it's all one. When the identity rises up, we celebrate it as a birth, and when it flows, we call it life. When it subsides, we call it death and grieve. A wave has a right to live her life as a wave, but she must also learn to live her life as water, because she is not only a wave, she is also water. and water lives without the fear carried by the wave.
We're experiencing the physical and psychological realms all the time. We're very familiar with them. But we need to also realize that there's a deeper part of us, a spiritual part. This is the part that's actually, although it's hidden and mysterious and unknown and very misunderstood, it's actually the part of us that is the most real. It's the part that never changes. The physical realm is always changing, obviously, as we see with the seasons, as we see when we look in the mirror year after year and we're growing older. And the psychological realm is just crazy, right? How often are your thoughts and feelings changing? It's like a crazy fairground ride in there, right? These words of wisdom in these quotes are pointing us to something much deeper, something that's real, unchanging, eternal. To have a proper understanding of death and grieving, we have to come to this realm. We can't ignore it any longer. When you look at the movement of a wave, rising up from the body of water and then coming back down, it's a beautiful picture of our human experience. We're born from the formless into the physical realm, and then we return back to the formless. Formless to form to formless. It's a natural movement of oneness, expressing itself as a person for a little while.
How would you describe the place where our dear ones go? I would describe it simply as your heart. They were always in your heart, as your heart. That's why you love them. That's what the feeling of love is. You and I are one. Your father always lived in your heart. It's where he only ever lived. He seemed to live down the road or in the next city, but that's not really true. That was just at the level of appearance. He always lived in your heart. He always was your heart. He always is your heart. Now you can't find him down the road anymore, so the only place you find him is in your heart. That's how to understand death. That's how to understand the ones you lose. You don't lose them, you gain them. My father passed away 18 months ago now, and I mean this honestly, really honestly. I don't think I've ever felt as close to him as I do now. You're feeling the shared being that you eternally are. The separation between you was just a temporary appearance. It lasted a little while, like a play on a stage that lasts a few hours. The unity that you always are is now evident in your experience. Allow that understanding to be your Father's parting gift to you.
I really love these words by Rupert Spira. You don't lose them, you gain them. I can really relate to that in my own experience. My father had a difficult life, and I sensed when he passed away that he was free, that he just became free. It filled me with joy and peace. He feels closer to me now than he ever did. I sense his presence when I'm in nature very much. It's actually very comforting to know that he lives in my heart. Just pause for a moment and receive these words. You don't lose them, you gain them. Of course, we lose them physically, but we gain them spiritually. And this is why it's so important to know that deeper part of ourselves. That's why I added that little quote by Thich Nhat Hanh at the end of Mooji's quote, that it's fine for the wave to be a wave and know itself as a wave and live life as a wave, the expression of water, right? The expression of life that we are. But it's also really important for the wave to know itself as water. So it's also really important that we get to know that deeper spiritual part of us, our true essence, our real nature. Otherwise, how can we know the ones we love who have left the world of form and are now in the formless? How can we know them? How can we feel their presence in our heart if we're not familiar with that spiritual part of ourselves? If we could put aside all the thinking of our conditioned mind, we would see very clearly that this is indeed where our loved ones live, in our heart.
If you want relief from it, you have to turn towards it. If you want relief, you have to turn towards the last thing that you want to turn towards, which is your grief. Don't escape the sorrow. Turn towards it. Turn towards the sorrow without any impulse to escape it or get rid of it. Turn towards the sorrow and say, I am the open, empty space of awareness. You're welcome inside me. Come in. I've been avoiding you because you're unbearable. Actually, you're not unbearable. It's my resistance to you that renders you unbearable. You don't have to try to remove that resistance. Your nature is resistanceless. You, the open, empty space awareness, are already without resistance. So you don't need to battle with your mind to welcome something that your mind doesn't really want to welcome. First of all, just face it. Then feel affection for it. Say to the sorrow, can you come close? You can even personify your sorrow as your loved one. That is the form he is appearing to you in now. Embrace it. Embrace him. And in time, the sorrow will subside, and then the being that your loved one truly is will reveal itself to you as your being. You will find him in your heart, where he always was and always is. Grieving is only an expression of your love. When a loved one dies and you feel grief, go deeply into that grief and get in touch with the love that is expressing. That hasn't gone anywhere. Be happy to have known him and to hold the love you share in your heart. That's not going to go away. Isn't that the most valuable element of a relationship?
We really don't know how to deal with our grief, do we? And why would we when we don't know this deeper aspect of ourselves, when we don't understand the bigger picture of what's going on, when we don't see the oneness of our shared being? The most important thing is not to run away from the grief, not to try and push it away, not to ignore it. All these things, including getting angry with life, all these things are an avoidance of this sadness, this deep, profound sadness that you feel when you lose someone you love. And Rupert guides us to do something that seems counterintuitive, to actually turn towards that sadness and face it and allow it, and not only allow it, but even welcome it into our being, because this is the only way to get through it and to really heal and move on in a better way. Now, I'm not a grief therapist or anything like that, so always check in with your being and do what feels right for you. This video is created to empower you, not to confuse you. Don't feel you have to put pressure on yourself. If you feel you're not ready to do this, that's fine. If you feel that you need to get some professional grief counseling, that's fine. My role here is to just present this deeper, more enlightening view of how to grieve and how to see and understand death. But always, always, always check with your inner wisdom to do what feels right for you, because no one can tell you what feels right for you, especially when it comes to grieving, because grieving is something that's deeply personal, deeply personal. No one can tell you what you should be feeling and what you shouldn't be feeling. In order to face that sadness and invite it to come closer and to welcome it, which may seem like an impossible feat, the key here is that you need to be in the position of awareness. You can't do this in your suffering separate self, right? So it's from the position of awareness, from that deepest part of you, where you already are this empty space that welcomes all things. It's like if you imagine the sky in relation to the weather and all the weather that happens in the sky, and this grief, this sadness, these emotions, these raw feelings you're experiencing, the confusion, the anger, everything, however it's manifesting in you right now, it's all happening within the awareness that you are. So it's making a shift in consciousness, really, from being inside the thought storm to observing what's happening and recognizing, wow, my being is just in turmoil at the moment, and I just can't take this. Or when will it go? I'm tired of this. When will the pain go away? If you can make that shift to the awareness that you are, to the being, the vast being of your sky, of the ocean, where you could recognize the wave and what's happening. And from that place, there is no resistance, you see. There is no resistance. So then you don't have to try and do anything. You don't have to try to accept your sorrow. You don't have to try and calm your grief. You don't have to try and make it go away. It's a beautiful freedom to allow yourself to go through what you're going through without any judgment, without any impatience. Rupert says you can personify your sorrow and your grief as your loved one and realize that this is how they're appearing to you right now. You can embrace that. You can embrace them. Embrace them in this sorrow, in this grief, realizing that there is such a huge loss in one sense, but in another sense, there's an unexplainable sweet gain. And through doing this, in time, that sorrow will subside and you will find them in your heart where they've always been. You know, it reminds me of after Jesus passed through death, he had to train his disciples to become familiar with his invisible presence, right? It's very much the same thing. It really is. Our culture doesn't share the understanding that we have this shared being and that it can't be taken away from us. And the chances are probably most of the people you know don't have that understanding yet. If you have had any experiences of this, I'd love for you to share them in the comments, because I think that it could be very empowering, encouraging and helpful for those of us who are experiencing and struggling with grief right now. Remember that at the deepest level, you are the space in which all things happen. Allow your grieving, allow everything that you're experiencing to happen in this loving, safe space.